Hello, and welcome to our panel discussion today with the Taiwan Film Festival Edinburgh in collaboration with Cinetopia. I'm Amanda. I run Cinetopia, which is an organization that aims to foster discussion around film and filmmaking. I'm thrilled to be working with the Taiwan Film Festival Edinburgh on this discussion event and hosting this conversation that certainly should be quite an engaging one on curating Taiwanese film for European audiences. I hope you've had the time to watch all of the films that have been on the Taiwan Film Festival Edinburgh Virtual Festival this year. Quite a diverse range of Taiwanese films, from documentaries, shorts, retrospectives, to a focus on the film director Midi Z. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do on their website. They're all offered for free, but do note that you'll need to register for them tomorrow. And I hope this discussion will further engage you on the breadth and scope of Taiwanese film. We have some incredible curators with us today, and I'm excited to hear more about their programs. A quick note is that this is a very interactive conversation, so we hope you'll be asking questions online. Please do, and we'll try to add them into the discussion as they fit within our conversation over the next hour and a half. So now it's time for me to introduce our panelists of the day. Today, our panel, we have three of Europe's and UK's foremost experts on Taiwanese cinema. For France, we have Wafa Ghermani. Wafa Ghermani holds a PhD from Université Paris 3, La Sorbonne Nouvelle, in her film studies, and she's focused on Taiwan cinema and national identity from the Japanese colonial period to now. She currently works with the Cinémathèque Française, but she curates film programs in and out of the Cinémathèque. And her aim is to introduce audiences to lesser-known sides of Taiwanese cinema. She's organized the program Taiwanese Bad-Mannered Cinema last year at the Cinémathèque, and also and also has worked with Vesoul Asian Film Festival for 15 years. Hi, Wafa. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Hi. Great. And from the UK, we have Chris Barry. Chris Barry is a professor of film studies at King's College in London. His research focuses on films from the People's Republic of China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Chinese diaspora, as well as on the production, history, and reception, and the film cultures of these countries. His publications include The Cinema and the National China on Screen, TV China and Mobile Cultures, and he's also served on various film festival juries. He's been interviewed widely on Chinese and Asian cinema and screen cultures by organizations such as the New York Times and the BBC. And he's also the current curator of Behind Taiwan's Lost Commercial Cinema, Recovered and Restored, that features symposiums and tours of the 200 plus surviving Taiwanese language cinemas, and it's been made widely available and restored by the Taiwan Film and Audio Institute. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Wafa is also a curator on the Taiwan Taiwanese language films exhibition. Yeah.
Great. We'll be talking about that in detail. And then we have Wang, who's the director of programmer of Queer East Film Festival, a newly founded initiative aiming to showcase rarely seen LGBTQ plus cinema from East and South Asian countries and amplify the voices of the Asian community in the UK. Working as a creative producer with primary interest in performing arts, films, and festivals, E has been involved in a variety of roles for arts and cultural events, and he holds a master's degree from Goldsmith University. E, welcome so much to this.
Hi, thank you.
Great. So I just wanted to start and ask all of you, what brought you to Taiwanese cinema, and maybe in particular, the focuses that you're very interested in at the moment. So maybe start with Wafa, since we...
Okay, I think I was brought up to Taiwan cinema because I was a film student and interested in Chinese cinema first, but then I was really wondering what was happening before Taiwanese new cinema, because it was something that was never discussed, and maybe except from some writing by Chris, in fact, who would sometimes talk about one of these Taiwanese language films, there was nothing. And so that's how I got interested, and I decided to go to Taiwan to study and see the film that no one was talking about. That's how it all started.
Great. And Chris, yourself?
Yeah, I guess, similar trajectory. I started out working on mainland Chinese films, but of course that was back in the 1980s, and Taiwan new cinema was so big. And then I heard about these films that were made in the 50s, 60s, and yet were, we just couldn't see them back then nobody seemed to know where they were. And when they gradually became available again, I wanted to bring them to audiences here in Europe.
Great. And yourself, you're from Taiwan, correct?
Yes, I'm from Taiwan. So I think actually the idea of Queer East started from a very simple realization. It's like here in London, or let's say here in the UK, there's just not many queer Asian films available for public audiences. And like for myself, I've been staying in London for around 5 years, and there's no doubt like London has one of the most vibrant film exhibiting scene in around the world, but still like you see more and more greater festivals, institutions, they are putting effort to showcase a diverse programs. And queer cinema, for example, like people are making effort to do that, but still like I just feel like there's a lack here. Is like queer Asian cinema, especially like when we talk about queer cinema, it's mainly, I'm sorry to say that, but it's very gay, white men dominate area. And I just don't see a lot of films made or from by people of color. So I think that's the very start point of I try to bring some queer Asian cinemas to the UK.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about your new festival that was, I believe, was going to be in April, but it's coming out in October now, correct?
Yes. So to give everyone a little bit backgrounds of Queer East, so like what you just mentioned, it's the LGBTQ plus festivals and to showcase queer cinema from East and Southeast Asia. So it's like Taiwan, Japan, Korea, China, Thailand, and 2020. So this year is our first year, and apparently it's definitely not a good year to initiate a film festival. So yeah, so that's kind of like our situation now. And at the moment, we are working extremely hard to try to bring the festival back in late October, and it will run through to January next year. And so the original QEFF was planned for April and May, and screening across 8 cinemas in London with 29 films from 15 countries. And at the moment, the good thing for us is the lockdown and the pandemic gave us a little bit extra time. So actually, when we start from October, we will bring our films in a hybrid format. So you will be in-person screenings and also online screenings available across the UK. And also we had put some extra films into our programs. And also we will go to cities like Manchester, Nottingham, Brighton. So it will be a UK-wide festivals start from October.
Great. And that conversation of touring, I think it leads to this idea of, what we're talking about today, which is, bringing Taiwanese cinema to European audiences and how they respond to it, because they might not have as much experience with that. So Chris and Wafa, do you want to talk a little bit about your tour of Thai-European cinema that you've been doing?
Yeah, maybe I could start out and then maybe Wafa could add a little bit. This is the second time we've done it. We did it first in 2017-18 with one group of about 10 films that had been restored by the Taiwan Film and Audiovisual Institute, and which also had English language subtitles on them. And that was a really important precondition, obviously, for being able to do it. And then we've repeated the whole thing with some films that have been more recently restored and subtitled. And in the first time, we worked mostly with university venues, and we had about maybe 10 venues in the UK and 7 or 8 across the rest of Europe, all the way across to Vilnius in Lithuania. And this time, fortunately, pre-COVID, before the disaster hit, we had quite a few film festivals lined up, like Five Flavors in Warsaw, for example, as well, and Cinema Rediscovered in Bristol here in England, as well as university venues. But of course, the COVID crisis has kind of decimated the whole project and caused us to reconfigure it. We put a lot of it online, and worked with the venues to do their screenings and did some sessions like these. And they've actually gone very well. They've been very exciting to do. It helps that they're black and white films that are in relatively good condition. They work all right online. I can't imagine trying to do, like a Ho Xiaoxian Film Festival online. So thank God we don't have to do that. But the other piece of news, which I was just telling Wafa, is we've literally just got it confirmed that we'll be able to hold the project over into next year. So for those venues that have had to postpone, we'll hopefully be able to pick it up next year, and they'll either do a physical screening, and what would you call it, an in-person screening, or another online screening. Wafa, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe about the reaction of people and how the audience reacted. I think I had numerous experiences. I had this Thai-European commercial cinema on the one hand, that was more with academic audience, and also some program I did outside, like at Cinematheque or in festivals that were with more regular audience. And that's true that the reaction can be quite different according to the places. So maybe for in the academic world, people will see the film in a more historical point of view, and it depends also if you're screening them to people working on Taiwan that are going to have a more anthropologic vision of them, or people working on film history, and in that case for them maybe it's a kind of disturbing, but also it's quite interesting when you link this kind of film with other commercial cinema of the 50s or 60s, like in even in Japan. Like recently I watched some Japanese movies that really looked like Taiwanese language films in Bologna somehow. And also I screened it to very different audiences. So in Vesoul, Vesoul is a very, very small city in France, even if the festival is very successful with 30,000 people going there to watch the movies. But they are really, they love film, but they don't always have a very artistic point of view, and they loved the Thai-European. Like for them, it was really touching, and it was a way of seeing Taiwan in the 60s and so on. And at La Cinémathèque, which is in Paris with a lot of film lovers, it was quite interesting to see different vision. Like for some people, it was terrible films, but for some others, they were really happy to discover this kind of films they were not used to, because they are used to Ho Xiaoxian. So it was, and some people were just going to every single screenings to see and watch the movies, and we'll talk about it and everything after that. So yeah, it's really interesting to have all this kind of different experience through the people. And recently in Vilnius, we did also an online Q&As, and I asked the audience after the film what they thought, because in the 60s in Lithuania, you also had Lithuanian film language films, which were made with less budget, which were not official Russian films, and so on. And it was really interesting to hear them react to that and to do the comparison with Thai-European. So yeah, it's really interesting experience every time, even as a researcher, in fact.
Can you kind of explain Thai-European to those who might not know what we're talking about in terms of this kind of cinema?
You want to do it, Chris?
Okay. Well, in Taiwan, there are two different languages, at least. There are a number of different languages, but two dominant languages, if you like. And one is the language that is part of the Minnan-Hua group, and is spoken by most of the islanders and has been spoken by most of them for many generations. And the other dominant language is Mandarin, which the KMT government brought over and imposed as the national language after the end of Japanese colonialism and after they were defeated by the communists. And so you had a situation by the 1960s where you had a kind of official cinema sponsored by the government in Mandarin, but the bulk of the audience didn't really speak Mandarin, and they wanted to see films in their own language. But those films, as Wafa was just suggesting, were mostly much lower budget. They were not made with government support. They were made by small companies, many of which went bankrupt. And there were over 1,000 made before television basically eclipsed that cinema in the early 1970s. There was no film archive in Taiwan in the early 1970s. And out of 1,000 plus films that were made in this period, which was really the first regular feature filmmaking industry in Taiwan, out of 1,000 plus films, only a couple of hundred have survived. And they, because of the kind of stigma, if you like, of them not being in Mandarin, the government in the 70s and 80s neglected them, and the cinephile culture also was wanting art films. You know, it was moving in the Ho Xiaoxian direction, which is the opposite of low budget genre cinema. And so they also tended to neglect these films, and it's only recently that they've been rediscovered. Hence the title of, you know, the series that we've been doing, Taiwan's Lost Commercial Cinema. It is this lost commercial cinema that has been somewhat recovered.
Great. And how long has this project been going on in terms of touring around? And is it particularly focused? Is your tour particularly focused in Europe, or is it all over internationally?
No, I mean, it's a lot of course, to do this, we need some support and some help, which we very gratefully received from the Taipei Representative's Office in London and the Ministry of Culture. And, you know, they operate in sort of zones. And so initially, when we did the first one, we were operating only in the UK. And then we got interest from people elsewhere in Europe. Forgive me, I live in Camden Town in London, so, you know, there's another drug bust going on somewhere. Anyway, so they allowed us to show them elsewhere in Europe, provided those European organizations were covering the costs. And then this time around, they were able to do a sort of arrangement with other Ministry of Culture and TRO offices in Europe. And so we were able to show them elsewhere in Europe. But we've just had a contact from the US, somebody wanting to show the films in the US, and that will happen. But again, they need to sort of find their own funding separately. So, you know, it's how it's been organized. And we've been doing this since 2017, basically. Yeah.
And Wafa, you had that knowledge in terms of like your studies in Taiyuan, but then you've kind of done some other projects in that focus on very specific things with the Cinematheque. Do you want to talk a little bit about the programs you've put on? Yeah,
well, for Cinematheque, it was a kind of the result of my research in my PhD. It was a kind of somehow my dream program somehow, because we at the time the Taiwan Film Institute had really restored a lot of movies and really wanted to promote them. And I was working, even if it started before I worked at Cinematheque, but when I started working at Cinematheque, I really tried to have this program, and it was a way to have the French audience understand that there was something outside Taiwan new cinema, and how maybe some films of the past from very different genre had somehow also a link. Like Taiwan new cinema did just not appear from anywhere, and it has some maybe secret paths and a kind of a secret link between Taiwan film history in the past and the Taiwan new cinema. So that's why the program I did was a kind of a mix of some Mandarin films, but not so official, like to see how some directors really try to play with the censorship and to offer their own vision, such as Panlay's film Typhoon, which is really one of the most beautiful films of the 60s, which is quite unknown, which is really a shame. And also some Tai Yu Pian, and I didn't choose what the Taiwan Film Institute was always pushing for. They were really pushing for melodramas. And I think the comedies, the Taiyu social comedies of the 60s are really, really funny and somehow sometimes maybe easier to watch. And they make you understand a lot about the situation of Taiwan in the 60s and the different influence of American comedies, Italian comedies, because you have, yes, Italian music, you have everything in that. It's a kind of a big mix of a lot of different European, Japanese, and Taiwanese genre all mixed together. Traditional opera and with very strong female characters, which is also very important because it's something you will find in Taiwan black cinema and also in new cinema. You have all this link with very strong heroines. And to finish this program, I finished with the very beginning of the 80s with what was called the Taiwan black cinema. So this very, what they call social realism, which was not really the case. But because these films, the Taiwan black cinema is really the last expression of the Taiyu Pian, even if it's in Mandarin and not in Taiwanese. Most of the directors were coming from the Taiwanese language film era, like some actors had become directors. And you can see the vision of the society, which is very black, the fact that they had no money, so they will shoot in the streets. And so there were so many links between the film of the 60s and the film of the beginning of the 80s. And it was, I think, a kind of interesting transition. And some also, I chose some very underground films that were like nearly never screened, such as Motun Face films, The End of the Track, which was such an incredible discovery made by the Taiwan Documentary Film Festival. And it was such an amazing film. It was also a way of showing that Taiwan had this possibility of a very more artistic cinema in the 60s and 70s, but these attempts were crushed by censorship and the situation at the time. So yeah, it was a way of a kind of a different Taiwan film history somehow.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that question that I think we're all alluding to here too is like, what is the complexity of language and identity politics like happening in all of the cinema that you're focusing on? And I was just and if we could just expand upon that maybe to audiences who might not understand that differences with language, that yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one of the things that we did was to build a website, which is just www.taiyupian.uk. And we put program notes for each film up there, a little introduction, various other materials, essays on directors, because I think you're right that when you're trying to introduce something new that people don't know about, you have to give them some background. And also, I think, we've already, all of us, been talking in a way, you also have to sort of counter or deal with their expectations. So if their only real knowledge of Taiwanese cinema is a very sort of high art knowledge, you have to make sure they're not walking in thinking they're going to be seeing, another Tsai Ming-liang movie or something, and make them understand that it's something different. And that helps a lot, I think. I also think with Taiwan, there's an additional thing. I don't know if people will think it's wrong of me to say this or not, but just that people in general don't know much about Taiwan itself. And so you often have to start at a very basic level, It's not as bad as it used to be. I always used to have to explain it's this island, the capital is not Bangkok, and all those kinds of things. But you don't have to do that anymore. But more or less, sometimes even you still have to do that.
Yeah, I think I experienced that yesterday. I was reading something about a summer at Grandpa's, Xiaoxian film, and in a French, very important film magazine. I think the guy who wrote the sum up thought it was in China because he said, "Oh, the grandfather in the film, despite the communist revolution and the Japanese occupation, is still very." And I was like, "What? It's Taiwan. It's not China." So anyway, so you see, apparently sometimes you still have to explain that. Yeah. So Taiwan is not China. It's not Thailand, and it's not China. So not the People's Republic of China, at least.
But I think that's exactly what I mean. A lot of Chinese people here will experience that, I'm sure. Like every time you say, "Oh, I'm from Taiwan," and a lot of people, the first reaction is, "Oh, yes, I heard of Thailand." And I think that's kind of like a lot of Taiwanese people here, like experienced this before. And that's also exactly why we chose Taiwan as our fourth country this year, because we are kind of like under a bigger umbrella of East and Southeast Asia. And this year we chose Taiwan as our fourth country. First, of course, it's still, at the moment, still the only country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. And also Taiwan has a very rich tradition of making queer cinema. So that's kind of like our first point to try to push this fourth Taiwan strand. And I think from my perspective, like what Chris just said, like it's actually quite difficult to explain Taiwan to like people probably they don't really have enough knowledge about like Asian politics or like Asian geography. So we try to kind of like build up our narrative here. Is like we find a lot here of East Asian queer cinema in London. So we want to bring this East Asia cinema to London. And then among the whole East and Southeast Asia, Taiwan, the spotlight of Taiwan shines because like it's one of the most one of the most important place when we talk about queer cinema. And so when you look to our program this year, like the Forbes Taiwan strand, we have 7 feature films and 3 documentaries and 8 short films. So the idea really is trying to bring the audience on a journey through the various stage of Taiwanese queer cinema. So we have very like early one, like 1990s Andy's Wedding Banquet. So it's like super classic, probably the only queer, like one of the few queer Mandarin speaking films foreign, like British people know. Like they always say, "Oh yes, I know Wedding Banquet, I know Happy Together." Then probably the only 2 films they know. And then we kind of like moving on to early 2000s, we have like Blue Gate Crossing, 蓝色大门. So it's like a coming of age, very one of the most popular like young youth love films in Taiwan. And then we have Spider Lily, so like by Zhou Meilin, it's like a lesbian film. And then I put quite a strong focus on the films made within the recent 5 years, because I feel like the contemporary modern Taiwanese cinema is not get a lot of attention. So we have like very latest 2020 made films in our features. And then we also have documentaries talking about structural poverty, and then talking about the online dating, and also like talking about the Christian church and the LGBT people, which I feel this topic will resonate the British people here because they probably have the similar experience here. And then we kind of like put a strong kind of like a very strong selection of short films, and most of the short films are actually made by young generations directors and also student works. But you will find like it's actually very interesting because like they have film. There's a film is actually explore the BDSM in gay community made by a female director, and this is something I feel a lot of Westerners they won't imagine, like, oh, this is the films from East Asia, because they will think we are quite conservative. Like people in Asia, they are all suffering. They are suffering from their social oppression, their social taboo. But like, it's actually a lot of films that already explore a very used to be very westernized topic, but it's happening in Taiwan and also other East Asian countries now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, you just really gave a really good overview of that. I mean, in terms of why you chose that Taiwan for your project, but I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about how it like Taiwanese LGBT, like the history and shooting styles might differentiate from other Asian cinema or South Asian cinema?
Yeah. I think if we like, I think the thing about Taiwan is I will say it's actually, it has this continuously passion and effort in making queer cinema compared to other Asian countries. And like when we talk about East Asian countries, as we all know, like Hong Kong, there's a period of like, I think it's 98, 97, there was like a golden age of Mandarin speaking cinemas in Asia, because like all the films we are talking about now is actually made in that 2 to 3 years period time in Hong Kong, like Happy Together, and then A Queer Story, Beauty. So A Queer Story is called 基佬四十, and then Beauty is 美少年之恋, and then they are all made back in that time in Hong Kong. And I think there are a lot of reasons for other Asian countries, like in China, they have this censorship, and the queer cinema making has to go underground. And in Hong Kong, probably it's because the commercial funding reasons, they kind of like there was a gap of queer cinema making in Hong Kong. But in Taiwan, the difference here is like, even though it still like went down, went up, but every year you will see people making queer films, and it's actually back from 80s. Even during that time, you are still under martial laws. There's the Bai Xianyong's novel called Crystal Boys, and then the director Yu Kanping, he adopted the novel to the first queer cinema, gay films in Taiwan. I think it's called Outcasts. And then like in 90s, it was the booming time, like a lot of queer cinemas got made in 90s. But you can see during that time, the topic will still be focused on this group of people. They got lost, they got abandoned by their family. They have to be in this like very famous Taipei New Park, and then they kind of like gathering together and then living their own life. But you can always feel like it's still like a social. I mean, you can still sense the social oppression there, and then you can see their struggles, their sufferings. And then when step into early 2000s, there's a new genre appeared, like Blue Gay Crossing. So this kind of like coming of age, campus, high school based, very useful cinema starts get into the public side. And I think this is actually a very interesting genre compared to not like Western society, because I mean, this kind of collective living style in the campus, and then you have to wear uniform, you have the same haircut, and you have like a military in your school to tell you can't have relationship with other men, and you can't have relationship with other boys, other girls, and then you just feel like these characters, they are actually living in a bubble. So in this bubble, like there's no society. There's just they're just between them, like this young girl, they probably these kind of films, they always focus on this self-discovery, their kind of like their question about their identity, and so it's like very pure kind of films in early 2000s. And then till now, I think the topic is got a very widespread. So like when we talk about queer cinema now, it's actually not just about gay, lesbians. It's actually people start to discover different topics, and a lot of topics are actually very social issue oriented. So we have films start talking about AIDS and HIV, and we have films, a very latest film called Dear Tenant, 亲爱的房客. It's actually talking about the same-sex marriage couple and the child adoption. So this kind of like new, very political oriented, social oriented films is kind of like the new cinemas in recent Taiwan. And I feel this is actually very exciting because they are showing different perspectives and different orientations of what queer cinema means to Taiwanese people and means to Asians. So yes.
Wondered if any of the other panelists wanted to add anything, because I know you have a lot of knowledge about this as well.
I think that was a very full answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I agree 100% that, you know, there has been that when you think about cinema in East and Southeast Asia, I think Japan is the only other country that has had, you know, consistent output of queer cinema since the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Japan is a much larger industry, a much larger market.
Yeah.
So it is a striking feature of Taiwanese cinema, yeah.
Yes. I think there's one thing in Taiwan quite interesting is they start to rediscover the films before 80s. Like I remember Chris showed the I think 70s, right? The end of the track. 跑到终点. So, yeah, I think it's late 50s or 70s. So it's like a very old black white films, but then people start realize, oh, it's actually there's a hidden queer desire in the film. So that's actually quite interesting in the current, Taiwan film industry.
Yeah, this is the one that is the same one that Wafa was talking about a bit earlier, and it has it's also known as The Tunnel, right? So it's got these two titles, but yeah, absolutely. And that film is now doing the rounds and definitely worth trying to see. I can see in the chat that, you know, we're being asked, you know, how do we think we can help expand the audience base for Taiwanese films, you know, beyond the cinephile community? And I thought it was a very interesting question, but, you know, I was thinking about how even getting to the cinephile community is quite difficult, actually. Never mind beyond the cinephile community. And this question, you know, I thought it might be interesting for people to hear that when I first knew that these films were now available with subtitles, that they were restored, I assumed, wrongly, as it turned out, I'm usually wrong, you know, I assumed that the British Film Institute, perhaps, or some of the well-established film festivals that are focused on Asian cinema and do retrospectives would be very excited about showing these films. And they were not. I mean, they were basically, I think the reason they were not is that they are under all kinds of funding pressures themselves. And so they need to have the known brands, the known product, if you like. And maybe the Cinémathèque Française is a bit different still, I hope. And because you've been able to show programs there that I know it wouldn't be possible to show at the National Films, the BFI South Bank here in London.
Well, in fact, I could do it because it was funded by Taiwan. Otherwise, they would have refused. So it was the deal. If it was completely funded, it was okay. And then it made a tour. It went to Switzerland and another cinematheque in France. But no, if with no fun, and you're right, because for example, in Cannes Classic, the restored film section in Cannes, they only take King Ho or this kind of directors. They will never, even Typhoon, I asked them if they wanted it, but it was not famous enough. And maybe it's because Taiwan cinema is somehow already known, because they screened the first Thai college film, because I think Thai film is so unknown that it's okay to put something unknown like that. But for Taiwan, I think there are some kind of we want the brand, we want the big names, and not this kind of
I think. I was just going to say that I think, here probably, even if you've got the funding, they don't want to do it. Because they need to sell tickets. Yeah.
But it worked in France. It worked quite well, in fact.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Maybe French audiences are more open, and also with some of the more established film festivals that I tried to talk to, their reaction was the same, that even if it's funded, they need to, they just don't believe they can sell enough tickets to make it really work. So what I discovered, going back to this original question of how to reach out to audiences, is I sort of was reminded again of something that I really learned a long time ago and forgot, which is the importance of the university as a site for screenings. You've got these lecture theaters. You can usually access them often for free or for a relatively small amount of money. And you can do screenings and other events. There's a lot of drug busts going on around here at the moment. So you can do all these things on the university at relatively low cost. And you can then start to establish a bit more of a buzz. And one of the things I have to notice is that, the first time we did it, 2017 and 18, we were only working with universities. But once we came to do it again the next time, obviously people had heard about it. And so suddenly some of these more general public-facing events, like Five Flavors or the Asian cinema festival in Prague, which they were more open to saying, okay, let's screen some of these. So it's about stepping stones, I think.
I think it's really interesting what you say, because I think in France it might be the opposite. That because we did it at Cinematheque, then it became interesting for other places, like other cinematheques or other festivals. And I think to reach a broader audience, you have to be careful of your narratives. So French people love, being told that we are a free country, that people are fighting for freedom. And so if you can put this program and say, okay, this film we're trying in their limits to go against the dictatorship of the time or the very conservative government, and it was somehow a preview or the first steps to the new cinema. So you speak to the cinephiles and you speak to the French people who think they are ahead of all the freedom fights, and they really love this kind of narrative. So you can use this, which is not it's not a lie, but I think that's really the narrative I use, because I know French audience is going to be, okay, it's something like that. I understand it's, but then I think it's how it works to try to go to a broader audience, like to find some topics that ring a bell for them. I think
probably our festival is taking a different approach compared to probably Thai European tour, because to be honest, I do think audience in the UK, they are quite lucky in a way, because you do get a chance to see a wide range of Taiwanese cinemas in different occasions or settings. Like in the festival circuit, I remember there was back in 2009, there was already a Taiwan Film Festival called, I think it's called Taiwan Cine Fest. And it actually ran a couple of years until 2013. And at the moment, you actually have film festival like Chinese Visual Festivals, like Leaf, and then more indie one like Aperture. They all kind of, and then of course the recent, like there are many Taiwan film festival happening across different cities in the UK, and they all show different kinds of Taiwanese cinema. And also, I feel in the campus, like what Chris just said, like there are a lot of scholars, academics, they are doing Taiwan film research, and also like you two, you put a great effort in promoting and introducing different kinds of Taiwanese cinemas to audience. And for us, that's why we kind of trying to be a joint force of promoting Taiwan, not just, of course, it's Taiwanese cinema, but also East Asian cinema. So we actually work with normal, it's not like normal, but like we actually work with a lot with independent cinemas and local cinemas. But of course, we got very lucky. We had a chance to work with leading institutions like Barbican, like Manchester's Home. So it's kind of like a mixture, but I feel we did do quite an extensive research of which cinema should work, because queer cinema is actually not a new topic for audience in the UK. Like people love the queer cinema. There are tons of different LGBTQ plus film festival happen every month here. And then, so we try to find those cinemas who tends to be more into like indie international films, queer films. So we work with like Genesis, Rio, they are all based in East London, and then they had audience there. And like my original idea is we are screening good films, interesting films. So it's just, you should screen like normal films, and it's like a normal festival. So we go with normal price. We don't do like a lot of film festival will do like £5 discounted price or something, or like screening free. I mean, that's also a good thing, but we kind of trying to do a different tryout. So we try to say this as normal. It's good content, and you pay and you see a film. So that's kind of like our approach. And then I'm quite happy, like cinemas here, they are quite supportive. So that's our first year, and we already got in partnership with around 10 cinemas in London and also outside of London.
I'm going to be adding a few questions from the audience here, and I'm across all of your programs. Have you noticed any difference in terms of reception when you're going to different countries? And I think maybe you've taken some of your programs online as well, so some of has reached kind of a global audience. So I thought maybe you can even add to that. But maybe we'll start with Chris in terms of the tour.
Yeah, I mean, Wafa already alluded to, the experience you just had in Vilnius a little while ago. And Vilnius, that was very interesting. And, I had a similar experience there as well. And I think it's definitely true that with each place, you have a different reaction, a different response. And some audiences find it easier to get the films and some of them just don't. It's not always a matter of, one country or another. Sometimes it's just a question of what the audience is. So the risk we have, I think, is when we're asked to show the films at a university and we're showing it to a bunch of young students. And I did have the experience of showing it once, showing the Taiwanese language films, which, I mean, they are fun films, but they're not, contemporary films, right? They're genre films, but they're not super fast paced or whatever. And I won't mention where, but I showed it in this university's East Asian Studies, school. And afterwards I discovered, I thought, well, why are these students are just so quiet. They were just not really interested. And I tried, everything I could think of, but they didn't get interested. Afterwards, I discovered that in this particular place, there were about 80 or 90 students there. Interestingly, I don't know why, at least 2/3 of the students in that school choose to do Korean, not Chinese or Japanese. And the big thing is Korean wave, right? You know, everything to do. So they come in wanting pop, you know, contemporary pop culture.
BTS.
Yes, BTS or whatever, right? And this is not BTS. So it was a lost cause. But then something like Vilnius, I think that was a really unique thing. This ability, and what I noticed both years in Vilnius was we started with small audiences and they quickly built. You know, so clearly people just clicked, right? You know, there's something, some similarity, some echo. I think in the cinephile, I don't know how it is in France, but in the UK, I think the cinephile community, especially younger cinephiles, are now much more open to non-art cinema. So where
true, especially you know, well, Cinematheque is kind of particular place. So you have some people who are really crazy. They would go and see any films they haven't seen yet. So in the screenings, because I would introduce nearly all the films, because I thought like maybe it answers one of the questions asking us if having a Q&A helps developing the audience. I think Q&As and also introductions, because these films, some of them are really hard to get if you just see them like that. You say, why have you chosen this film? Like, it's not well shot, it's not so great, and you have to explain why. And so at Cinematheque, you have all kinds of people. So there's the one who are just there to watch a film and they don't want introductions, they don't want Q&As. But most of the audience, you had also the younger generation who are really big Asian film fans anyway, and would just go there. And yeah, I think you have this kind of cinephile who are just curious for everything, and they will just go and maybe hate the film, but that's okay. They will go and watch the other ones. Yeah, some of them just hated most of them, but they went to see every screening. And true, there are Q&As or even discussions. Sometimes it was just very informal discussions after the films, and it really helped, I think. And I think it was one of the principles of this tour was to have these Q&As afterwards too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we, you know, so we try to make sure somebody's there to talk to the audience for every screening, because, you know, it just comes out of nowhere at them. So you have to have people who can do that. I think the other thing is, of course, you do get the audience, you do get the other audience, which is the audience that is already interested in Taiwan. And so, for example, screening it in ZOA, School of Oriental and African Studies here in London, it has a huge Taiwan Studies Center. And so the primary audience are people who are already interested in Taiwan. But these films, you know, they come from the era of martial law, when the government had very strong control over the media and over cinema. So we're used to only seeing these god-awful healthy realist films, so-called sort of government propaganda films that, you know, presented this very sort of, I mean, optimistic image of Taiwanese development. You know, people spend their lives among thousands of ducklings in the mud and come home and they're spotlessly clean, you know, this sort of kind of, and speak pure Mandarin, which nobody in the countryside in Taiwan does. But nonetheless, these were the films we were seeing. So these other films, although they also had to go through censorship, you know, as Wafa mentioned, many of them were shot on location just because they didn't have the budget to do it in studios. So suddenly you are actually seeing what the streets looked like in Taiwan in the 60s, the real streets, not these sort of, you know, optimistically pictured streets from the Mandarin cinema. So for that audience that's interested in Taiwan, there's something rather different that's appealing about them. So it's absolutely true. You have to think a little bit about each audience, position the films, introduce them, be there to try and do some Q&A. And the Q&A, hopefully, if it goes well, and I think it did in most cases, you see some of the people come back again, bring some friends with them, and so on. So it's all about audience development in a way. And through that also, I think, developing more knowledge about Taiwan, but also about Taiwan cinema.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And I was just thinking maybe to know what people might like. So that's why when the Taiwan Film Institute at first really pushed for the melodramas or even some films that were fun for Taiwanese, but maybe not, maybe at least for me. That's why I really pushed for some comedies that I knew would be interesting for French people. And so and someone asked me what kind of comedy I would recommend, where there was two that I was able to screen in France that were
Foolish Bride.
Foolish Bride, Naive Bridegroom, which is a film I really, really like. I also was able to screen a film which is called The Elegant Mr. Hu, which hasn't been subtitled yet in English. It's in French now. It's a story. It's really a kind of group of people living in the slums and another rich guy who has mistresses, and it's kind of like how they have to meet and work together to survive, which is also very funny. And you have there's description of Taipei under construction and of two societies, like people still working, menial works, children have to work in the streets, and it's the richest part of the society. And there is another one I really, really love, but I couldn't screen it, and it was I was really sad. The translation in English is like the itinerant, umbrella repairer, like mender. And it's a story of people who have all to live in the same house, very worn out house, and how they all work on solidarity. And it's something which is quite interesting. I think in Taiwanese language film, it's the notion of solidarity between people that you don't find always so much in the official cinema, where you have to obey different layers. And I think, this kind of comedy of people having to be together and to help each other to survive, I think it's something that people really like. It's kind of just nearly feel-good movie somehow, but also showing realities, because they are really shot in slums most of the times, and with all kind of different people. And that would be my three favorite comedies. And if I have to recommend some of them.
I also think there's. Sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
Oh no, I was going to change the subject, so go ahead, and then I'll ask a question as a follow-up.
Okay, I was just going to say that I also think the element of surprise for audiences can be a good thing too, because some of these films are really quite wacky and strange, and so especially from the contemporary point of view, and that can be quite appealing. And so, you're right that you have sometimes the Taiwan Film Institute has its own ideas, and you have your ideas as well, and I know that this year the Taiwanese Film Institute, Film and Audiovisual Institute, I should say, has been very eager to restore the films of the auteurs of Tai Yupian. Which it's a genre cinema, but it sort of has some auteurs, some better directors, and it's true they're much more, they're quality films. But the other film they had restored, which they were at first not really keen for us to include, is this film called Tarzan and the Treasure, which of course is my favorite, I have to tell you. So you get the Taiwanese Tarzan, supposedly in the Malaysian highlands, which is really the hills outside Taipei somewhere. It's a very funny film. Why not see that? And then also in the last season we did, there's a film called The Bride Who Has Returned from Hell, which is a Gothic film adapted from a British Gothic novel, believe it or not, that was, translated into Chinese almost immediately in the 1960s on publication. Again, something you just don't expect, right? This transposition of a British Gothic novel to somewhere in southern Taiwan. So those kinds of things, definitely, it's always good to play up that, well, here's something you just won't believe, right? So you can use that too to kind of promote the movies. Yeah.
Great.
Amanda,
I was going to ask a question, and then some people have asked a similar question. I was thinking, with this idea of Q&As and intros and stuff with audiences and audience development, how now under this new kind of online and or hybrid formats that we're having to take going forward, can you continue to develop that audience? I mean, I really did enjoy all the program notes, and I actually love your website as well, the queries, so I learned a lot from that just to prepare for this, conversation. So I'm just wondering how you're thinking about that kind of continual audience engagement, and building upon discussion.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. No, so I think just due to our original festival was postponed, so we then came up to online series online. So one is in April and the other is in July. So both of them were all online. And I to be honest, personally, I don't really fancy any online screening. In a way, I'm a bit like old school. I really want to sit in the dark cinema and watch films. And so that's kind of my personal preference. But I do feel a lot of people, they are actually very enjoy this online experience. And so surprisingly, our online series were quite successful in a way, because we got a very great number of views, and then we reach a lot of cities, countries, like European countries. And so I think that's actually a good thing for us, because for myself, I've been always staying in London, but you do know, like a lot of people, if you always host physical events, in-person events, then a lot of people, they probably do interest in this type of cinemas, but they won't able to make it, because it's actually very, I think we all know it's actually very expensive to screening international films, foreign films here, because compared to screening local films with local distributors. So I do feel this online streaming do help us to extend our audience base. And like what we just talked about, the Q&A thing, we did one Q&A about the queer activism, grassroots queer activism in Shanghai. And it went, we had over 170 live views online. So it's kind of like an encouragement for us. It's like audience do really want to know, to understand what's happening in Asia. And I think, so we, at the moment, our revised film festival is like this hybrid format. So we will put some online screenings and then also in-person screenings. So the online screening will be UK-wide. So it's the hope for audience to be able to watch them from their home.
Okay.
Yeah. And we originally, of course, everything was going to be offline. Everything was going to be old school in the dark, which I prefer as well. But it was once we had to do a kind of mix. We've done some events like in Vilnius. They haven't had much COVID there, so the actual screenings were in a regular movie theater. But of course, they don't want people coming from those countries where they have had a lot of COVID, like us. So we did it. We were zoomed in, right? And that was kind of interesting. But you're still dealing with a very local audience. Now, other things we've done, we've still had the host, say, University of Helsinki. But because the screening has been online, I think this is what you were saying as well, E, people from all over the world could sign up. So you have a very interesting situation where we had hundreds of people seeing the film that we'd chosen for Helsinki. And then in the actual, the room, I think there were also 70 or 80 people. And they were this mix, right, where some of them were very much from Helsinki. And then some of them were from everywhere. So you're having to sort of work between these two groups. So the ones from Helsinki, many of them obviously knew each other, right, personally, offline. And then you've got somebody from New Zealand, somebody from Nigeria who came more than once, who I've been communicating with, by the way, and who wants to do some screenings in Nigeria, which I think is really exciting idea. So you can see how it leads to new things.
Yeah.
But
I
it
think
creates this complicated mix. Yeah.
I think one of the good thing I notice about is because the films we are doing, they are all just very rarely seen for UK or European audience. So once you screen it, you actually also help these films to get more opportunities. Because like recently I got in touch of like several curators and programs from Prague, from Vienna, and they are interested in the films we screened before. And then they ask, how to get in touch with the filmmakers, stuff like that. And then you get satisfied about this. Like you are screening the films other curators are interested. So I think this online thing in a way to help us expand, but also help those filmmakers work being seen by more people.
Yeah. And of
Yeah.
course,
Sorry,
go
sorry,
ahead.
no. Yeah, I think you're right, because I'm like you. I'm an old school person. I think it's easier to speak to watch the movies together and to speak in person. But that's true. For example, during the lockdown at Cinematheque, we created an online platform that in fact allowed a lot of people outside Paris to finally be able to watch some very classical movie. And in fact, we're going to do a Taiwanese film program next year on this platform. And you're right for that. There is this kind of outreach. Suddenly it's not just limited to one place most of the time, the capital cities, and it allows much more people to have access to that. And the Q&As online, I think, also allowed more people to communicate together, even if it's not the ideal thing to have a real exchange somehow.
And also, I think that this online environment, one of the advantages of it is what they call sort of like a thin and wide audience, right? That when you put something like one of these films on, you immediately attract people who really do have a special interest in those films. So when you have the discussion room, and as I say, people might be in New Zealand, they might be in Nigeria, in Canada, whatever, but they're motivated, unlike the group of kids who really wanted to see a Hallyu film, right? Were disappointed and have been sort of brought in by their teachers to watch this film, whether they wanted to or not. So, it's there are pros and cons with everything, right? And it's definitely very satisfying to have an audience who have, clearly selected, they have a real interest and they really want to know more. And very often also you find in the room suddenly there's 20 or 30 people who have really done scholarship on these topics. And so they actually they don't just want to ask questions, they have very substantial things to contribute to the discussion. So that's quite different again from, the in-cinema screening very often. So I think there are some definite advantages or at least from my point of view, I've seen some positive things coming out of this situation, which I wish had never happened. But
No, I think, you're right. The accessibility and the ability to bring people on very particular, interesting topics around the world has been great. This is just what with your own festivals and programs, and this is in relation to a question that's been asked, and maybe just in general that you see film festivals changing within this world now. I mean, you mentioned going forward with a hybrid festival and whatnot, but what are the things you think we can take from this in order to prove it when we hopefully come out the other side?
I think more and more screening events, festivals will be hybrid. They will do screenings in the movie theater, but they will also have events online. And exactly what the balance will be, I don't know. But, I've got friends who work in film festivals that have been very, very resistant to doing any online screenings. They believe that the cinema means going to the cinema, and they're really, and I sympathize, but they're really struggling, to get through this year, to survive. And I think it's a pity not to look for the opportunities when something like this happens, however bad it is, there are possibilities, there are new opportunities. And so I think when this is all over, if it's all over at some point, this is, I mean, a real question right now. But when it's all over, I think, hopefully, I'm sure actually festivals will think, well, what were the things that really worked while we were doing things online? And they'll still want to try and do those kinds of things, as well as do the new things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I know it's not completely linked to COVID, but I think maybe because during the lockdown, we all thought also the way we were traveling and everything, and maybe people won't be willing to take a flight just to go to another city for a few days and to cross all over half of the world. And maybe the hybrid way is going to be a way of, I don't know, saving some energy too. I'm still wondering, but it might be also one of the reasons.
I think there's a question about a specific streaming platform. Am I allowed to say that?
Oh yeah, I was going to ask. Go ahead.
I think one of the audience asked about there's a Taiwanese LGBT streaming platform called Gaga Ulala, and asking about how they make the visibility of the Taiwan cinemas across the globe. I think these online streaming platforms is booming. Of course, we can see, especially from now, and this actually linked to the other question about post-COVID festivals, because I do see more and more festivals start to working with online streaming platform, no matter like Mubi or like Filmdu, and then I think in a way it's actually not bad from audience perspective, because you don't need to be present in a specific time on a specific day. Like you can watch the films from any time you want. And like while the audience just talked about the Gaga Ulala, it's a Asian LGBT focused streaming platform. So this is kind of like, I mean, in a way, these kind of platform do help this very specific genre of cinema being discovered by international audience. So I would personally, like, it's our first film festival, so I still hope we can continue doing festival in cinemas, but we are actually very open for this kind of like hybrid format, and then working with streaming platforms. And for myself, I personally think this online Q&A will be a great solution for us, like for people like us doing international film festival, because traveling a guest from Asia is just the money is crazy itself, and also the time consuming, and also it's actually it's a very tiring job for guests as well, because like Taipei and London, there's like 7 hours time difference. So I do feel sometimes like if they can just go through online, then probably make things easier. So yeah.
In terms of watching film, it could be good, but festival is not only watching film. I think there is all this atmosphere of festival, or something that happens, like the alchemy, like some. I think festival is. Well, you all know that we are all working in festival and things like that, but there is something about the atmosphere and the way you meet people live during a festival. I think that's something that the online screening won't achieve.
I don't think I will accept the online festival concepts. Okay. Like it will be online streaming, but festivals still need to in a physical form.
I mean, I agree with you, but I think just to be a nuisance, right? But I think in this situation, this context of COVID and everything else, people are discovering a way to make, I mean, what's missing potentially from just streaming a film online is the sense of an event. If you can just watch it anytime, pay your however many pounds and stream, you lose that sense of event. And I think some festivals are trying to force people to all watch the film online at the same time. Yeah. I think that's kind of I actually think that's a big mistake. because basically you're still watching it at home, right, in your bedroom or in your living room, and it's just annoying to be forced to watch it at 9 o'clock or at 8 o'clock or something. So that's not interesting. But I think creating events like this, where people come together to talk and to answer some questions, and all the rest of that does create a sense of an event. Or it's a different kind of event. Of course, it's not the same as mingling in the lobby of the movie theater. But right now, you don't want to mingle with anybody you don't know. So we have to wait, right? But we can do this, and this, as you're saying, suggests it is a way to bring people together who maybe couldn't be in that same space together without a lot of effort. But it's a relatively easy way to bring people together. So I think we are seeing new forms develop, and I don't think we should resist that. I think we should, and I think give it a bit of time. And I think you'll see that the traditional festival continues, and this continues as well.
Yeah. And it does seem that it's on the curators now to really frame. I mean, it's always been on the curators to frame it, but that there's a lot of extra new things that you're exploring in terms of how to bring people together. Like, you can't network in, you can network in this virtual space, but it's very hard to have that kind of non-awkward like break or something. But but now it's re-exploring how your website or your live stream or something is fostering that discussion in a new way. Really interesting.
Yeah,
I think I'm not sure what I'm seeing here yet, right? But in some of these events, what I've seen develop now is a situation where you have 4 or 5, however many of us on screen, and we're being asked questions and we're talking. But something that you couldn't do really in the regular movie theater or in a regular conference is you have the chat going if it's an open chat, it becomes a very lively conversation of its own, right? Mm-hmm. Where people in the audience are able to talk to each other in a way they couldn't do because they'd be told, shut up, be quiet, if it was in the movie theater. And they're talking to each other, and you're looking at this, and you're trying, and it's creating a new sort of dynamic, a new set of protocols about how to handle that, how to introduce some of that discussion from the chat into the live spoken conversation and so on. And so I think there are, you can do some things. It's not only about trying to make up for things that you miss. It's also you can do some things in this environment that you couldn't do in the regular movie theater or the regular conference or whatever. So I want, surprisingly, considering I consider myself to be a pessimist, I'm trying to say, let's think about the good side of things. Yeah.
Well, my thought on that too, and also speaking of like kind of films, you're kind of introduced to people who might not know about them or that history and that background, is this idea of attention. So like, we're so easily distracted in our own homes, but also how to choose a film that, for example, you said at the Cinematheque, there might be people who go every single day. That's just kind of a classic habit for them. And I'll try something new. But, once I'm in that dark screen area, my attention span is going to be focused on this film. And then, it seems like it's going to be a hard, like an interesting thing for us to kind of navigate. Or maybe as a whole, as audience members ourselves, we'll be changing what we do watch and how we do things online. I don't know.
How we watch it.
Yeah. I also just want to ask if you have recommendations. I mean, for films that you mentioned a couple of your favorite, but if you want to particularly make a mention to your particular programs or films that you want to highlight to this audience, to make sure they go check your websites or future programs and explore.
Your event is coming up quickly, so why don't you tell us first?
Self-promotion. No, I will say, if I can only choose one, I do really want to recommend a film called Turning 18. It's a Taiwanese documentary, and the Chinese the name is 未来无恙. English is Turning 18. And I think these films is a piece of good news about these films is if the plans goes well, this film will be screening in London and Manchester. So audience do have a chance to see these films in big screen. And I want to mention these films is because these films actually caused some arguments when I was doing the program, because I have a friends. I have friends. They told me like they don't agree these films being put under a queer cinema category, because it's a film about it's a documentary about two girls live in East Taiwan, and then they suffer a lot from the lack of resource, the structural poverty, and then they had to deal a lot with their family. And the queer elements of this film is one of the character. She's lesbian, but it's a very tiny part of these films. But I still want to program it as part of the Korean Film Festival, is because I think this kind of normalization of character is a very important step. Especially, sometimes I feel in a way it's like queer cinema, they are too overemphasized and to over portray being queer people in their life. I mean, of course, being queer is part of the character's life, but it's not he or she, her entire life. And then we need to start normalization these people. They are queer people, but doesn't mean because they are queer people they are different from people. And these characters show me that because during the film the revealing of her sexuality is so natural. It's like nothing wrong. She just happened to love a girl. And also I feel like she's only 17 years old and she suffers a lot from her loss. And then she suffers a lot in her family and her personal traumas. Like being queer is actually a very tiny thing in her life, and it's the only tiny thing she can control and she can enjoy it. And I think this kind of a message is myself as a curator, I want to send to our audience. It's like, yes, queer films, they are not just all about a man love another man, a girl love another girl. It has it has a lot of layers, and then you need to explore it. And I just feel like if you are interested, you can go to see these films, and it actually like brings me a lot of emotion about being queer and then the life experience of being queer in Taiwan. So yes, that would be my recommendation.
What would be okay? Maybe mine would be Foolish Bride again, because it's a film of 1967, 68, and I think it's very funny to see how the sexual revolution is translated to this film, because officially in official movies you never see that, not until a few years later, not even. And how this film is a very sassy film which explodes every principles of films, like of how women should behave, how men should behave, of adults and younger people. And I think I had to do the translation in French, and I realized how many double entendre. It was only sexual talks all the way around, and so I think it's a very, very, very funny movie. And yeah, I would encourage you to see this one. What about you, Chris? Tarzan.
Yes, I already said Tarzan because I think Tarzan's hilarious, and a lot of fun too. It's kind of interesting to see this cosmopolitan imagination from Taiwan. You know, people imagining traveling in Southeast Asia and so on. But I wanted to say there are all these melodramas that you were mentioning as well. That are these often they're last train to Kaohsiung, first train to Taipei, encounter at the station, the husband's secret, otherwise known as the underwear scandal. Just telling people that title, immediately the audience is going to go up. But these films are all very interesting, I think, as well, for talking about the changing of society that you were mentioning already, Wafa, and trying to trace this a much more tragic experience of that than the official government cinema wanted to portray. So that's interesting. But I think what I would say, rather than trying to mention individual films, is I just would encourage everyone to, because everything with our season, we're still rapidly adjusting to COVID. Go and look at www.taiyupian.uk and look at the tour, because on the tour, if there are online screenings that you could sign up to no matter where you are in the world, information about that will appear on that section called the tour. And so I think, you might be in Portugal, but you can still watch the online screening that is put up by, I don't know, a university in Poland. Why not? So that would be the best way to get those opportunities.
That's fantastic. We have one final question, which actually really culminates, I think, the whole conversation. And it's, since online screenings to some extent break down geographical boundaries, would it be possible for curators in different countries to work together and organize cross-regional festivals of Taiwanese Sinophone cinema and encourage dialogue amongst audience of different countries? And I think that's somewhat what you're doing right now as well, by working together and as we're chatting. So just wanted to hear your feedback on how that might be enhanced more with what the work you do across countries.
I think that's interesting, because I think that curators are already working all together, but in different countries, like 4 different countries. Like I've been working in Poland for 5 flavors many times. I was asked to work in Belgium and everything. So I think, in terms of curator, yes. In terms of audience, we haven't done that before, but I think that's through the online system allowed that. I don't know what you both think, Chris and E.
I think probably for the audience side, the difficulty is actually not from the festival or curators side. It's actually for most of the distributors. They will want geo-locked. So like if you are screening in the UK, then your film has to lock in the UK. So of course, if the distributor are willing to give the worldwide right, then of course it will be a good thing for audience. But I also feel like there's a reason for geolock, of course, because like they want to sell the films to different film festivals, stuff like that. But we see we actually like Korea East, we will have a collaboration with Taiwan Film Festival Edinburgh in October. So that's kind of like city with cities, this kind of the collaboration is of course something we can do. And I do feel from festivals and curator side, sometimes we do share films. Like I share the films with another film festival in the US, and then it's kind of like more about the programming sharing. But in terms of the audience, sometimes it's beyond of our control, I think.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is to actually imagine, how we're going to do it with the audience. But I think, that's interesting to think about. But I do think one of the things that's going to change is this whole, the conception of territories, right?
Yeah.
Inevitably, how it's going to change, I don't know, but it is going to change. And so we have to watch this space and see over the next year, whether they keep trying to lock things in, or they have to recognize that that's not going to work anymore.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation. I think it was really, really interesting. And I have to say, hopefully everyone will be going to your respective URLs and checking out your future programming and your tours and online and hybrid festivals going forward. Do have to mention, though, that the Taiwanese Film Festival Edinburgh is ending tomorrow. So there's plenty of films to watch online for free right now if you're in the UK. So please make sure you check it out by tomorrow, Sunday. So that's it for us and for this discussion. Thank you so much, Chris, Wafa, and Yi, for being part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.